Under the indifferent gaze of a blood moon, snow whispered secrets that no one was left to hear. Ilara's boots crunched through the endless white shroud of the northern mountains, each step a defiance against the cold that clawed at her bones. The wind howled like a forsaken wolf, carrying the faint, acrid scent of pine smoke from villages she could no longer call home. 3 moons had passed since the elders had branded her worthless, their voices echoing in her mind like the crack of ice underfoot. Useless Omega, too weak for the pack's survival. They had stripped her of her furs, her place by the fire, and cast her out into this frozen exile, where the snow buried not just tracks, but the fragile threads of belonging. She huddled deeper into the ragged cloak pieced from scavenged hides, her pale blood thinner than the others, they said, leaving her fingers numb and blue-tinged. The lunar necklace, forbidden relic of her mother's line, hung heavy against her chest, its silver crescent etched with ancient runes that glowed faintly under starlight. It was the only inheritance she carried, a symbol of protection whispered in old tales of the Deus's chosen. But protection felt like a cruel jest here, where blizzards erased the world and hunger gnawed like an unseen beast. The path she followed was no path at all, just instinct guiding her toward a jagged outcrop where rumors spoke of hidden caves, sanctuaries for the lost. Ilara's breath came in shallow clouds, her lunar gaze, silver-flecked and haunted, scanning the horizon. The mountains rose like the spines of ancient dragons, their peaks veiled in mist that tasted of salt and sorrow on her tongue. She had survived by wits alone, foraging frozen roots, trapping the occasional hare, drinking from icicles that wept in the brief daylight. Yet isolation carved deeper than any blade. Nights brought dreams of the pack's warmth, the rhythmic weavos that once bound her spirit, now silenced by rejection. As dusk bled into the sky, painting the snow in hues of bruised purple, a distant rumble stirred the air. Not thunder, but the low growl of something alive. Ilara froze, her heart pounding against her ribs like a caged bird. The wind shifted, carrying a metallic tang. Blood. Fresh, dark, and mingled with the musk of fur and fury. She pressed against a boulder, its surface rough and unyielding, and peered into the gathering gloom. There, at the edge of a ravine, sprawled a figure half buried in snow. A man, broad-shouldered and clad in tattered leathers stained crimson, his dark hair matted with ice and gore. He lay motionless, one arm twisted at an unnatural angle, a gash across his side, weeping steadily into the white. No pack scent clung to him, only the raw bite of injury and something deeper, shame, perhaps, or the weight of unseen wars. Ilara's instincts warred within her, flee as the elders had taught the weak to do, or approach, drawn by the Deus's pull she could not name. Curiosity, laced with fear, won. She crept forward, the snow muffling her steps, her breath visible in the freezing air. Up close, his face was a map of hardship, sharp jaw shadowed by stubble, eyes closed beneath brows, furrowed in pain, lips cracked and pale. A warrior, she sensed, from the scars crisscrossing his exposed skin, marks of battles fought under moons that judged without mercy. Blood pooled beneath him, dark as spilled wine, steaming faintly against the cold. "Who are you?" she whispered, more to the wind than to him, her voice lost in the howl. No answer came, only the ragged rise and fall of his chest. Ilara glanced back at the darkening trail. Hunters could be near, drawn by the scent of weakness. But leaving him felt like abandoning a piece of herself, the part that still believed in bonds forged in desperation. With trembling hands, she looped his good arm over her shoulder, ignoring the jolt of heat from his skin against her chill. He was heavier than stone, his weight dragging her down as she hauled him toward the cave she knew lay hidden behind a veil of icicles. The wind lashed at them, whipping snow into her eyes, blurring the world to white and shadow. Inside the cave, the air grew still, heavy with the echo of dripping water, and the faint mineral tang of earth. She eased him onto a bed of dried moss she'd prepared for herself, the fire she kindled earlier casting flickering light across his form. As flames danced, illuminating the cave's walls etched with faded lunar symbols, much like her necklace, Alara tore strips from her cloak to bind his wounds. The gash was deep, edged with what looked like claw marks, not blade. His blood smeared her fingers, warm and viscous, a stark contrast to the icy numbness of her own veins. He stirred once, a low groan escaping his lips, but his eyes remained shut, lost to whatever fever gripped him. She sat back, the necklace pulsing faintly against her skin, as if awakening to the stranger's presence. In the fire's glow, his features softened, revealing a vulnerability that mirrored her own exile. Who was he, this broken wanderer, felled by winds that spared no one? Alara did not know, but in that moment, under the cave's protective arch, she felt the first thread of an unseen tether, instinctive, unwelcome, born of shared solitude in a world that devoured the solitary. Outside, the blood moon climbed higher, its light filtering through cracks like silver veins, watching as empathy took root in the silence. Yet doubt lingered in her chest, sharp as the cold. Sheltering him might invite death, or something far more perilous. For in the north, strangers brought not salvation, but the shadows of old decrees. The fire's embers hissed like unspoken regrets, casting elongated shadows that danced across the cave walls, where ancient lunar runes seemed to pulse in rhythm with Alara's uneven breath. She watched the stranger, Kale, as he had murmured in his delirium before slipping back into unconsciousness, his chest rising and falling in shallow defiance against the encroaching fever. The metallic scent of his blood lingered in the air, mingling with the damp earth and the faint herbal sharpness of the poultice she'd pressed to his wounds. Her hands, still stained crimson, trembled as she added twisted branches to the flames, the wood crackling like bones under pressure. Outside, the wind's wail grew insistent, a mournful chorus that rattled the icicles at the cave's mouth like fragile wind chimes. Alara's lunar necklace warmed against her skin, its crescent shape a quiet anchor in the uncertainty. She had bound his injuries as best she could, drawing on fragments of lore from her mother's hushed stories, tales of the Deuce's mercy for the forsaken. But mercy felt precarious here, in this hollow sanctuary etched by time and forgotten rituals. Who was this man, felled by violence in the wilds? His scars spoke of command, of clashes under full moons where alphas led packs into glory or ruin. Yet his silence carried a deeper fracture, a guilt that seeped from him like the slow drip of melting snow. As the night deepened, the blood moon's glow seeped through fissures in the rock, painting his face in silver and shadow. His eyes fluttered open at last, stormy gray and clouded with pain, locking onto hers with an intensity that stole her breath. Instinct surged through Alara, a primal tug like the pull of tides under lunar command, but she shoved it down, rationalizing it as mere survival's illusion. Omegas like her did not form bonds with strangers, they endured alone. "You?" he rasped, voice gravel rough from disuse, propping himself on an elbow despite the wince that twisted his features. Blood flecked his lips, dark and accusing. "Why?" Alara knelt back, her cloak pooling around her like spilled snow, maintaining the distance of a barrier. The fire's heat licked at her face, contrasting the chill that had settled in her bones from the exile's endless march. "The cold claims the abandoned," she replied softly, her lunar gaze steady. "I couldn't leave you to it, not without trying." He studied her, his gaze tracing the pale lines of her face, the faint blue veins at her temples, marks of her diluted blood, the weakness that had branded her exile. Shame flickered in his eyes, quickly masked by a warrior's stoicism. "Kyle," he said, the name dropping like a stone into still water. No title, no lineage, just a fragment of identity, offered as if it weighed too much to withhold. "You've risked much for a fool who wandered too far." The cave seemed to shrink around them, the air thick with unspoken questions. Elara felt the necklace's runes hum faintly, as if recognizing something in him. An echo of destiny she dared not name. Curiosity warred with fear. His scent, now mingled with the cave's earthiness, stirred an unwelcome curiosity in her core. But she resisted, focusing on the practical. The way his wound wept anew, the distant howl that pierced the wind like a warning. Before she could respond, a low growl echoed from the darkness beyond the entrance. Not the wind, but something deliberate, predatory. Kyle tensed, his hand instinctively reaching for a weapon that wasn't there, his body coiling despite the agony. Alara's heart hammered, the sound echoing in her ears like tribal drums. She crept to the cave's mouth, peering through the veil of ice. Shadows moved against the snow-swept ridge. 3 figures, cloaked in furs and bearing the metallic glint of blades, their breaths visible plumes in the moonlight. Hunters she knew by their purposeful gait, the way they sniffed the air like wolves on a scent. Not hers, they sought something larger, the tang of royal blood that now tainted her refuge. "They're coming for you," she whispered, turning back to him, her voice laced with the edge of accusation. Fear coiled in her gut, cold as the mountain streams, but beneath it a spark of defiance. This cave was her sanctuary, marked by the Deuce's symbols. She would not yield it lightly. Kyle's jaw tightened, guilt etching deeper lines into his face. "My pursuers," he admitted, the words heavy with the burden of secrets. "Debts from old wars. Stay back. I'll not drag you into this." But Elara shook her head, the wind's howl masking the approach. Empathy bloomed unbidden, a fragile warmth against the encroaching dread. He was no mere wanderer. His presence commanded even in weakness, yet his eyes held the melancholy of one who had wielded power at too great a cost. She grabbed a jagged branch from the fire, its tip glowing orange, and positioned herself at the threshold. The hunters' voices carried faintly, harsh commands in the tongue of the northern packs, laced with the fervor of betrayal. The first burst through the icicles, shattering them like brittle promises, his blade raised. Elara swung the branch, the flames hissing as they met fur, eliciting a yelp of surprise. Kyle surged forward despite his wounds, tackling the second with a guttural roar that reverberated through the cave. Blood sprayed anew, warm and slick against the stone, as he disarmed the intruder with a twist born of desperate strength. The third hesitated at the entrance, eyes widening at the sight of the wounded warrior's ferocity. But Elara's improvised torch drove him back into the snow, the scent of singed hair sharp in the air. Panting, they collapsed against the wall as the hunters fled into the blizzard, their howls fading into the night. The cave fell silent, save for the crackle of the dying fire and their ragged breaths. Kyle slumped beside her, his shoulder brushing hers, a contact that sent an instinctive shiver through Elara, denied yet undeniable. The bond formed in that shared defense, empathy weaving through the fear like roots through frozen soil. His guilt mirrored her rejection. 2 exiles finding fleeting solidarity under the moon's watchful eye. "You fought for a stranger," he murmured, his gray eyes meeting hers, vulnerability cracking his resolve. "Why risk it?" Elara touched the necklace, its warmth a quiet revelation. "Because the Deusa doesn't abandon the broken," she said, the words tasting of truth she hadn't voiced before. But doubt lingered. Sharp as the cold seeping back in, sheltering him bound their fates, inviting shadows she might never outrun. Yet in his gaze, she saw the first glimmer of something redemptive, a choice neither could yet name. "And now, I invite you to leave a trace of your presence in the comments. Tell us where in the world you're watching from, and the exact hour you hear this story. We wish to know how far these northern confessions travel, and at what moments of the night they find you." The cave's silence settled like a heavy pelt after the hunter's retreat, broken only by the distant moan of wind threading through the peaks. Alara's pulse thrummed in her ears, a wild rhythm echoing the fire's subdued crackle, as she wiped sweat and blood from her brow with the back of her hand. The branch she'd wielded lay smoldering at her feet, its embers casting erratic flickers across Kyle's face, illuminating the fresh strain etched there. His wound had reopened in the fray, a dark rivulet tracing down his side, but he made no complaint, only watched her with those storm-gray eyes, now stripped of their guarded veil, revealing a raw gratitude that twisted something deep in her chest. She turned away first, busying herself with the poultice, her fingers slick and trembling as she mashed herbs against a flat stone. The scent of crushed leaves rose sharp and green, cutting through the coppery tang of violence that clung to the air. Why had she fought? The question lingered unvoiced, but its weight pressed on her like the mountain's unyielding stone. Exile had taught her solitude's armor, yet in that moment of intrusion, her sanctuary, her fragile claim to survival, had ignited a fierce protectiveness. For him, a stranger whose mere presence unraveled her careful isolation. Kale shifted, wincing as he leaned against the wall, the rough granite biting into his back like accusations from the earth itself. "You could have run," he said, his voice low, threaded with the gravel of exhaustion. "Left me to face them alone. No debt binds you to this madness." Alara met his gaze, the lunar necklace cool now against her heated skin, its runes a faint reminder of protections invoked and tested. The fire's warmth bathed her face, but it couldn't thaw the chill of doubt coiling in her gut. "And watch them claim this place," she replied, her tone steadier than she felt. "It's all I have left. Besides—" She hesitated, the words catching like thorns. "The Diusa marks her own with mercy, even when it's foolish." He nodded slowly, a shadow of melancholy crossing his features. As if her words stirred ghosts he preferred buried. The cave felt smaller now, intimate in its confinement, the air humming with the residue of their shared exertion. Outside, the blood moon hung low, its crimson light seeping through the cracks like veins pulsing with unspoken fates. Ilara tended his wound again, her touch careful, almost reverent, as she peeled back the sodden bandages. His skin was fever-hot under her palms, a stark contrast to her own perpetual chill, and where her fingers brushed him, a subtle spark ignited, not pain, but an instinctive awareness, like the first stir of spring beneath winter's crust. As she worked, fragments of his story emerged in halting murmurs, drawn out by the quiet intimacy of the task. He spoke of the northern wars, not with the boast of a victor, but the quiet sorrow of one who had led too many into the maw. "Choices made under full moons," he said, staring into the flames, "that echo in the blood of the fallen. I sought solitude too, a tone. But shadows follow kings, even those who abdicate their thrones in thought. Kings." The word hung between them, heavy as the snowdrifts outside. But Ilara let it pass without probe, her lunar gaze fixed on the task. Yet it stirred unease. His bearing, the deference in his posture even now, hinted at lineages she dared not contemplate. Instead, she focused on the sensation of his breath, syncing with hers, the way empathy wove through the silence, like invisible threads. He had fought for her, too, shielding her from the second hunter's blade with a desperation that belied his wounds. In that act, the barrier of stranger eroded, replaced by a tentative alliance, two souls adrift, bound by the night's mercy. The wind's howl crescendoed suddenly, rattling the cave's entrance and sending a flurry of snow spiraling inward. Ilara froze, her hand stilling on his side. As a new sound pierced the gale, the low, rhythmic thud of paws on packed ice multiplied. More hunters? Her heart clenched, the necklace warming anew, as if sensing the threat. Kyle rose unsteadily, grabbing a loose rock as makeshift weapon, his body taut with the instinct of command. "Stay behind me," he growled, the alpha in him surfacing like a blade from its sheath. But Alara shook her head, rising to his side, her own resolve hardening like frost. "No, we face this together." The words surprised her, born from the bond that had taken root in the fight's aftermath, a recognition that his guilt mirrored her rejection, his flight her exile. They moved as one to the threshold, the cold air rushing in like a living entity carrying the scent of fur and steel. Through the veil of swirling white, shadows coalesced, not 3, but a pack of 5, their eyes gleaming with the feral gleam of loyalty, twisted by betrayal. One stepped forward, a scarred beta with a voice like grinding stones. "Kale of the North," he snarled, "your evasion ends. The Council demands your return, or your head." Kale's face hardened, the melancholy yielding to steel. But Alara saw the flicker of pain beneath, the weight of commands that had forged such enmity. The hunters advanced, blades drawn, their boots carving dark paths in the pristine snow. The first lunged, and chaos erupted anew. Kale met him with a savage swing of the rock, bone cracking against skull in a spray of red that steamed on the ground. Alara dodged a swipe, her agility born of lean survival serving her well, and drove a shard of ice into another's thigh, eliciting a howl that blended with the wind's fury. They fought back to back, breaths mingling in the fray, his strength bolstering her speed, her intuition guiding his strikes. Blood slicked the snow at the entrance, crimson blooms against white, and the moon above witnessed it all, its light turning the scene to a tapestry of silver and scarlet. One hunter broke through, pinning Alara against the wall, his claws raking her arm, a shallow gash that burned like fire's kiss. Kale roared, a sound primal and protective, hurling the assailant into the night with force that spoke of restrained power unleashed. The last 2 fled as their leader fell, gurgling into the drifts, leaving the air thick with the metallic reek of defeat. Alara slumped against Kale, her wounded arm throbbing, but the pain was secondary to the rush of their unity, the way his arm encircled her waist, steadying her, not just physically, but against the void of isolation. Empathy had deepened into something visceral, a bond forged in blood and shared defiance, resisted yet undeniable. His touch lingered, warm through her cloak, stirring the Deuce's whisper in her veins. In the aftermath, as they retreated to the fire's embrace, Kale bound her arm with gentle precision, his fingers tracing the cut with a tenderness that belied his warrior's hands. "You saved me again," he murmured, his gray eyes locking onto hers, vulnerability raw in the firelight. "A debt I can never repay." Ilara's breath caught, the necklace pulsing like a second heartbeat. The cave, once a solitary hollow, now thrummed with their intertwined fates, the wind outside a lullaby to the fragile trust blooming amid the ruins. But as the moon dipped toward dawn, a deeper revelation stirred within her, an ancient gift awakening, paths unseen shimmering beneath the snow, urging her toward truths that could shatter or redeem them both. In his gaze, she glimpsed the possibility of redemption, not as reward, but as the hard-won choice between crown and compassion. Yet the shadows of his past loomed, promising trials that mercy alone might not withstand. The fire's glow had dimmed to a sullen pulse by the time Alara stirred from her uneasy vigil, the cave's chill seeping through her like a persistent doubt. Her arm throbbed where the hunter's claws had grazed it, a shallow fire that mirrored the deeper ache in her chest, the one born of Kale's revelations, half-spoken in the night's quiet. He slept fitfully now, propped against the wall, his breathing a ragged cadence that synced with the distant drip of melting ice. The lunar necklace lay heavy against her skin, its silver crescent warmed not by flame, but by an inner stirring she could no longer ignore. Paths. Whispers of them tugged at her mind's edges, faint as the wind's sigh through unseen crevices, urging her toward something buried beneath the snow's unyielding veil. She rose silently, pulling her cloak tighter against the encroaching cold, and stepped toward the cave's mouth. Dawn's first pallor bled through the cracks, turning the outside world to a monochrome haze where snowdrifts rose like silent sentinels. The blood moon had yielded to a paler sister, its light silvering the peaks in a way that made the mountains seem alive, breathing with secrets. Ilara's lunar gaze sharpened, drawn by the necklace's subtle hum, a vibration that resonated in her veins, thin and pale as they were. She had always felt it, this intuition, dismissed by the elders as weakness, a flaw in her omega blood. But now, with Kale's fate tangled in hers, it bloomed insistent, revealing threads invisible to others. Kneeling at the threshold, she pressed her palms to the frozen ground, the bite of ice numbing her fingers. The world shifted. Beneath the surface, lines unfurled like veins of quartz, paths hidden by centuries of blizzards, ancient trails woven by the Deusa's hand for the forsaken. They snaked through the ravines, evading the hunter's likely routes, leading southward to forgotten passes where warmth lingered in geothermal springs. One path glowed brighter, pulsing with urgency, a way out, not just for survival, but for redemption, skirting the council's grasp and the shadows of betrayal that hounded Kale. A gasp escaped her lips, the vision pulling her deeper, the necklace flaring with ethereal light that cast her shadow long and wavering. She saw not just routes, but echoes, fragments of destinies intertwined. Kale's crown, heavy with the blood of decrees that had shattered lives, including one that mirrored her own exile. The gift of the Pathfinder, long dormant, manifested in full, a spiritual unveiling under the moon's indifferent watch. It was no mere survival instinct. It was the Deusa's mark, a key to unraveling the knots of fate that bound the broken to their kings. Kale's voice shattered the trance, rough with awakening alarm. Ilara? He was at her side in an instant, his hand on her shoulder steadying her as she swayed, the cold air rushing in like a thief. His touch grounded her, warm and calloused, sending that denied spark through her core. He knelt beside her, gray eyes narrowing at the necklace's glow, now fading to a subtle sheen. What sorcery is this? Your eyes. They burned silver. She met his gaze, the weight of the revelation pressing on her tongue like unshed tears. The wind howled softly beyond, carrying the faint, acrid scent of distant smoke. Perhaps the hunters regrouping, or the council's fires signaling pursuit. Not sorcery, she whispered, her voice threaded with awe and trepidation. A gift. The Pathfinder's sight. I see the ways beneath the snow. Hidden trails the Deusa carved for those who wander lost. One leads us free of them, Kale. South, through the veiled passes. His breath caught, recognition dawning like a blade's edge in firelight. He traced the necklace with a reverent finger, not touching her skin, but close enough to stir the air between them. The cave's walls seemed to lean in, the ancient runes echoing the symbol at her throat as if the sanctuary itself bore witness. The legends speak of it, he murmured, melancholy deepening the lines of his face. An Omega's dawn, rare as pale blood, to guide alphas from ruin. But you, exiled for weakness, they said. How could they not see? Ilara's heart clenched, the introspection turning inward like a winter gale. The gift had always been there, a quiet rebellion against her branded uselessness, but manifesting it now felt like a curse as much as a blessing. It bound her to him irrevocably, this instinctive connection evolving from empathy to destiny's chain. She resisted the pull, rationalizing it as the Deusa's whim, not her own desire, yet his nearness, the scent of his blood and earth, wove through her senses, undeniable. They saw only what fear allowed, she said, rising to face him fully. And you? What do you see now? Kale's eyes held hers, stormy depths reflecting the moon's silver. Guilt shadowed him, a cloak heavier than any fur as fragments of his past surfaced unbidden. He had issued decrees in his youth, royal edicts banishing the weak to preserve the pack's strength, omegas like her, cast into the wilds without mercy. The irony twisted in him like a knife. The very woman who had sheltered him, fought beside him, now revealed as the key to his salvation. "I see a truth I evaded," he admitted, voice low and raw. "You are the Pathfinder, Ilara, the one the prophecies name as Redeemer for a fallen king. My fate, it circles back to you." The words hung in the frigid air, a revelation that cracked the fragile shell of their refuge. Outside, a lone howl pierced the dawn, not of hunters, but of the wild itself, a spiritual call that resonated in her bones. Ilara felt the paths calling, urging flight, but the bond resisted severance. Love, if it dared form, would be no easy surrender, but a moral forge. Cale's hand lingered near hers, the space between them charged with unspoken choice, to follow the gift's lead or confront the crown's shadows that had condemned her long before their meeting. As the first rays pierced the mist, turning snow to glittering diamonds, Ilara turned from him, the necklace a burning talisman. The Deuce's paths offered escape, but at what cost to the heart? In his gaze, she glimpsed the Alpha's ethical torment, duty clashing with the compassion she had awakened. The wind whispered dilemmas. Was she his guide to freedom, or the mirror to his deepest shame? The revelation bound them tighter, yet sowed seeds of trial, where mercy's crown might yet elude the guilty. Subscribe if you believe mercy can crown even the fallen. Comment Luna if you'd walk through the storm for someone who saw your... The paths beneath the snow called to Ilara like veins of silver fire, insistent and unyielding. But the weight of Cale's gaze anchored her more surely than any blizzard. Dawn's light filtered into the cave, turning the air to a crystalline haze, where motes danced like forgotten prayers. Her arm still burned from the hunter's claw, a shallow reminder of the night's violence, but it paled against the revelation churning within her, the Pathfinder's sight, awakened not by will, but by the Deuce's inexorable hand. Cale stood too close, his presence a storm of heat and shadow, his gray eyes reflecting the turmoil she felt mirrored in her own lunar gaze. The necklace at her throat pulsed faintly, its crescent a bridge between them, symbol of protections now tested by truths too sharp to evade. "We can't linger," she said, her voice a thread in the chill, pulling away to gather what scant supplies remained. Dried herbs, a waterskin frozen at the rim, the smoldering branch from the fire. The wind outside had stilled to a predatory hush, as if the mountains themselves held breath, waiting for the confrontation she sensed brewing. Kyle nodded, binding his wound with strips torn from his own cloak, his movements precise, yet laced with the melancholy of a man who knew flight was but a deferral of judgment. "The paths you see, they lead us to the heart of it all," he murmured, his tone heavy with the ethical fracture she could almost taste like blood on the tongue. "The Council's lair, in the iced spires of Eldridge. My past waits there, Ilara, and yours." She froze, the name Eldridge evoking ghosts from her exile, the grand citadel where decrees were forged in fire and frost, where the elders had proclaimed her banishment under the Alpha King's seal. Cale's words confirmed what her gift had whispered in visions, echoes of a royal edict, cold as glacial melt, condemning omegas like her to the wilds for the pack's purity. He had been that king, the one whose shadow had stripped her of home, leaving her to wander these unforgiving peaks. The bond between them twisted, empathy curdling into betrayal's bitter edge. Yet resistance warred with the instinctive pull, her pale blood singing of redemption even as anger clawed her chest. Love, if it dared root here, would demand more than survival. It would forge mercy from the forge of old wounds. They emerged into the paling light, the snow crunching underfoot like brittle bones, the air sharp with the scent of pine resin and distant smoke. Alara led, her senses attuned to the hidden trails, the necklace guiding her steps as if the Dusa herself traced the way. Cale followed, his limp masked by sheer will, the silence between them thick with unspoken accusations. The path wound through a narrow ravine, walls of ice-glazed rock rising like the jaws of some ancient beast, their surfaces etched with veins of quartz that mirrored her visions. Hours blurred into a cadence of ascent and descent, the cold seeping through her furs, numbing fingers and toes, but sharpening her resolve. Introspection clawed at her. What strength lay in forgiving the hand that had cast her out? Was compassion a chain or the key to rebirth? By midday, the ravine opened to a plateau where the wind resumed its howl, whipping snow into veils that obscured the horizon. Huevos echoed from the east, faint at first, then swelling to a chorus that raised the hackles on Alara's neck. Kyle tensed beside her, his hand finding her arm in a grip both protective and possessive, the warmth of his touch a visceral anchor amid the gathering storm. "They've scented us," he growled, the Alpha's command surfacing like a blade from scabbard. Through the flurry, shapes materialized. A dozen wolves in fur and steel, their breaths plumes of defiance, led by a figure whose silhouette screamed rivalry. Thorn, the beta trader who had risen through whispers of ambition, his eyes gleaming with the fervor of one who coveted crowns, stained in betrayal. Thorn halted paces away, his pack fanning out in a semicircle that hemmed them against the drop, the snow at their feet stained faintly red from some prior skirmish. He was broad, scarred from wars Cale had waged, his fur cloak edged in the silver of stolen lunar relics, mockeries of the Dusa's grace. "Kyle!" he sneered, voice carrying over the gale like a whip crack. "The fallen king slinks with an exile's whore. The council tires of your ghosts. Return, or we'll drag you in pieces." Cale stepped forward, shielding Alara instinctively, his body a wall of restrained fury. Blood from his wound dotted the snow, dark blooms against white, and the air thickened with the musk of impending violence. "Thorn, your ambition blinds you," he replied, voice steady but laced with guilt's undercurrent, eyes flicking to Alara in silent apology. "The Dusa's paths do not bend to traitors. Stand down." But Thorn laughed, a guttural sound that echoed off the ice, and lunged with two betas at his flanks, blades flashing in the weak sun. The confrontation erupted visceral and swift. Cale met the first with a clash of fists and steel, his roar primal as he disarmed the foe, sending him tumbling into the drift with a crack of bone. Alara dodged a swipe from the second, her Pathfinder sight revealing a hidden crevice behind her, a narrow escape etched by the Dusa's hand. She countered with a shove, using the plateau's edge to unbalance him, his scream lost to the wind as he plummeted. Thorn circled Kyle, their duel a dance of old grievances, blows landed with the weight of political games turned bloody, Thorn's claw raking Cale's shoulder anew, drawing crimson that steamed in the cold. Ilara's heart pounded, the necklace burning against her skin, urging her to intervene, not with force, but sight. She saw it then, a fault line in the snow, a fragile bridge over the chasm, weakened by the pack's weight. "Kyle!" she cried, her voice cutting through the fray. "The ground! It's false!" He glanced, trust flashing in his eyes, and shifted his stance, drawing Thorn onto the deceptive crust. The traitor charged, overconfident, and the snow gave way with a groan like the earth's lament. Thorn scrambled, claws scraping ice, but Cale's boot pinned his hand, the Alpha's face a mask of ethical torment. "End this," Kyle demanded, breath ragged, blood dripping from his wounds to mingle with the snow's purity. "For the pack's sake, yield." Thorn's eyes burned with hatred, but beneath it the fear of a man who knew his betrayals, poisoned councils, whispered alliances with rival clans, would doom him. The remaining pack hesitated, Huevos faltering into whines, loyalty fracturing under the weight of their leader's peril. Ilara stepped to Kale's side, her presence a quiet force, the lunar gaze steady. Forgiveness or war? The choice loomed, moral and raw. Slay the traitor and ignite endless vendettas, or spare him, risking the crown's fragile peace. Kale's hand trembled on the blade at his belt, guilt etching his features as he met Ilara's eyes. In that suspended breath, philosophy wove through the violence. What was power, if not the mercy, to sheath the fang? He withdrew, hauling Thorn back from the edge, the pack's growls turning to wary silence. "Go," Kyle commanded, voice thunderous yet compassionate. "Tell the council I come not as conqueror, but as one who seeks redemption's path." Thorn spat blood into the snow, rising with venomous glare, but slunk away with his wolves, tails low, the wind swallowing their retreat. The plateau emptied, leaving only the echo of confrontation and the heavy silence of choice. Kale slumped against Ilara, his weight a confession, her arms encircling him as the bond deepened, resisted no longer, but accepted in the forge of trial. Blood and sweat mingled on their skin, the cold air a balm to fevered limbs, but the dilemma lingered. Forgiveness granted Thorn freedom, yet bound Kale to the pack's judgment, where Ilara's own past awaited under the bloodied moon. Love demanded they face it together, a redemptive union teetering on war's brink, where compassion's crown might yet shatter or save. As the sun dipped, casting long shadows over the crimson-streaked snow, Ilara felt the paths shift beneath them, leading inexorably to Eldridge, where the true trial of hearts would unfold. The descent into Eldridge's shadowed valley felt like stepping into the Deuce's own forge, where ice met fire in a crucible of judgment. Ilara's boots sank into the thickening snow, each step pulling at her like the earth's reluctant grasp, the lunar necklace a steady thrum against her chest, its crescent now etched with the faint scars of their trials, silver warmed by the blood it had witnessed. The air grew heavier here, laced with the acrid bite of torch smoke and the underlying musk of gathered packs, weevos rising in distant waves that vibrated through her bones. Kale walked beside her, his limp more pronounced, shoulder bandaged but seeping crimson through the hasty wrappings. His gray eyes scanned the horizon, stormy with the ethical storm raging within. The paths her gift revealed converged here, no longer hidden veins, but a web of inevitability, drawing them to the citadel's iced spires that pierced the sky like frozen spears. Introspection clawed at Ilara as they crested the final ridge, the wind's howl fading to a conspiratorial whisper. What was rebirth, if not the shedding of old skins in mercy's flame? She had glimpsed it in Kale's choice to spare Thorn, the Alpha's hand staying the blade, not from weakness, but from the profound strength of one who had spilled too much blood under moons that demanded obedience over compassion. Yet doubt lingered, sharp as the cold, gnawing her pale veins. Could forgiveness mend the decree that had exiled her, or would it demand a sacrifice greater than survival? His presence beside her stirred the bond deeper, no longer resisted, but woven into her core, an instinctive tether that rationalized itself as destiny's cruel poetry, love emerging not as balm, but as the trial that tempered souls. The citadel loomed, its walls a fortress of glacial stone veined with torchlight, reflections dancing like captive stars, guards at the outer gates, betas in steel-gray armor, eyes hardened by loyalty's unyielding code, parted without challenge, their sense laced with wary recognition of the king they had mourned as lost. Whispers rippled through the ranks like wind through pines. Kyle returns, with the exile. Ilara's heart clenched, the necklace pulsing in warning as they passed under the archway carved with lunar runes, symbols mocking her forbidden heritage. Inside, the great hall awaited, a cavernous expanse where fire pits roared against the chill, casting elongated shadows that writhed like specters of the past. The council assembled there, elders in furs, heavy with authority, their faces etched with the lines of wars Kale had led, and at their center, the High Seer, her eyes milky with visions, clutching a staff topped by a crescent not unlike Alara's own. Kyle halted at the threshold, his hand brushing Alara's in a fleeting anchor, the warmth of his skin a visceral reminder amid the hall's oppressive heat. "They will demand my crown," he murmured, voice low and threaded with melancholy, guilt etching fresh shadows across his features. "For the decrees that weakened us. For you." The confession hung between them, raw as an open wound, confirming the vision her gift had unveiled. His royal edict, issued in the fervor of youth to purge the weak, had sealed her fate among countless others. Empathy warred with the sting of betrayal in her chest, but the Deuce's paths whispered of union, not severance, redemption forged in the choice to heal what power had broken. The High Seer rose, her voice echoing like cracking ice. "Alpha King, your flight shames the North. Thorn's tail paints you traitor, fleeing with an Omega branded useless. The pack cries for judgment. Reclaim your throne through blood or forfeit it to the worthy." Murmurs swelled, weavos from the shadowed galleries blending with the fire's crackle, the air thick with the scent of sweat and simmering rage. Elders stepped forward, one bearing a scroll stained with ink and time. The decree itself, its words a condemnation that mirrored Alara's exile. "She saved you," the seer continued, eyes fixing on Alara with piercing insight. "Yet her blood dilutes our line. Will you crown mercy or honor duty?" Kale's jaw tightened, his body coiling as if against an unseen blade, blood from his wounds dripping onto the flagstones in dark patters that steamed faintly. The hall fell silent, breaths held like the pause before a storm's fury. Alara felt the Pathfinder's sight surge, revealing not just escape routes through the Citadel's underbelly, but a deeper revelation. Threads of fate linking her gift to the Pack's salvation. Hidden passes that could unite fractured clans against southern invaders, if only the king chose compassion over conquest. Her lunar gaze met his, silver-flecked and unyielding, urging without words. Strength lay not in the throne's iron grip, but in the freedom to redefine it. "I return not to rule as before," Kale declared, his voice resounding like thunder in the mountains, stepping forward to shield Alara from the council's glare. The firelight gilded his scars, turning him from broken wanderer to reluctant sovereign. "The decrees I signed were chains forged in fear, exiling the very light that guides us. Alara is no dilution. She is the Pathfinder, the Deuce's chosen, whose sight unveils paths to our survival." Gasps rippled through the hall, the seer's staff trembling as recognition dawned in her milky eyes. But dissent brewed. A rival alpha, Thorn's shadow ally, lunged from the ranks, blade drawn in a bid for power, his howl a challenge that shattered the fragile peace. Chaos ignited. Kale met the assault with feral grace, disarming the foe in a clash of steel and claw, blood spraying across the furs like sacrificial wine. Alara moved instinctively, her gift illuminating a concealed lever in the wall, a mechanism to seal the hall's aggressors, buying time for truth to prevail. She triggered it, stone grinding shut to trap the traitors, the necklace flaring bright as the Deuce's approval. The council recoiled, then knelt as the seer invoked the ancient rite, lunar light filtering through high slits to bathe them in silver benediction. In the hush that followed, Kyle turned to Alara, his hand cupping her face with a tenderness born of renunciation. "The crown is yours to share, or cast aside," he whispered, gray eyes vulnerable, the alpha's duty yielding to the man's redemption. "I choose you, not as prize, but as the mercy that redeems my bloodied hands. Union, if you'll have it, over the throne's hollow fire." Her heart swelled, the bond sealing in that visceral moment, love accepted not as immediate flame, but as the slow burn of healed wounds. Yet the choice loomed larger, The pack's faith teetered, demanding her integration or exile anew. A final sacrifice where compassion might crown them both, or shatter the fragile rebirth under the moon's unblinking gaze. Outside, the wind rose anew, carrying weavos of tentative hope, but within, the fire's embers hissed like unresolved spirits, the air heavy with the philosophy of power. What was true strength, if not the courage to embrace the forsaken? Ilara's touch on his arm affirmed it. A quiet vow amid the gathering dawn, yet the Deuce's paths whispered of one last trial, where freedom and fate would collide in the heart of the north. The hall's fire pits roared like the Deuce's own fury, flames leaping to lick the glacial arches overhead, casting the council in a mosaic of gold and shadow. Ilara stood transfixed, her lunar gaze locked on Kale's. The necklace at her throat a blazing talisman that seared her skin with its insistent pulse. The air thrummed with the residue of violence, blood's coppery tang mingling with the heavy incense of the rite. The seer's staff still raised as if summoning the moon itself through the citadel's slits. The trapped traitors pounded against the sealed stone, their muffled howls a fading echo. But the true confrontation lingered in the charged silence, where every breath weighed like a decree unspoken. Kyle's hand remained on her face, calloused thumb tracing the curve of her jaw with a reverence that unraveled her defenses. His gray eyes, storm-tossed and raw, held the Alpha's torment, the crown's iron weight versus the fragile warmth of this bond, forged in exile's chill and tempered by mercy's fire. "Ilara," he whispered, voice cracking like ice under strain. "The pact demands purity through strength. My decrees scarred us all, yours most cruelly. If union means my abdication, I yield it. But know this, without you, the throne was hollow, a scepter stained by choices that devoured my soul." Introspection surged through her like the wind's sudden gusts, carving paths in her mind's frozen drifts. The Pathfinder's gift unveiled it all now, not just hidden trails, but the spiritual web binding them. His guilt a mirror to her rejection, their fates a revelation under the blood moon's descent. Love resisted no longer. It bloomed visceral, a heat coiling in her core. Rationalized as the Deuce's decree, yet felt in every fiber. The scent of his bloodied furs, the steady thrum of his pulse against her arm, the way his presence thawed the perpetual chill in her pale veins. Yet rebirth demanded sacrifice. To claim him meant facing the pack's scorn, her weak blood diluting the royal line, or turning from the North's heart, leaving the clans to Thorn's lingering shadows and southern wars. The High Seer lowered her staff, milky eyes piercing the haze, her voice a resonant toll that silenced the murmurs. The Deuce tests the fallen king. The Pathfinder stands revealed, her sight a beacon against the encroaching dark. But the old blood cries for vengeance, exiles restored or the crown reforged in isolation. Choose Kyle. Power's solitary flame or compassion's uncertain union. The moon judges without mercy. The council stirred, elders shifting in their furs, weavos rising tentative from the galleries, some defiant, others laced with the howl of dawning faith. A rival's voice cut through, sharp as a blade's edge, an elder loyal to Thorn's whispers, stepping forward with scroll in hand. "She is tainted, king. Her pale blood weakens us. Banish her again, reclaim your throne unmarred, or watch the pack's fracture under this folly." The words struck Ilara like claws renewed, reopening the wound of her exile, the snow-buried memories of rejection flooding back, the elder's cold pronouncements, the wind's wail as she wandered alone. Kale's body tensed beside her, muscles coiling like a wolf poised to strike, blood from his shoulder wound tracing rivulets down his arm to pool at their feet, crimson offerings on the flagstones. Philosophy wove through the tension, unbidden. What was strength, if not choosing mercy over the throne's devouring maw? He turned from the council, facing Ilara fully, the firelight gilding his scars into a map of regrets. "I condemned you once," he said, voice low but carrying like thunder's prelude, "in the name of survival. No more. The Deuce's paths led me to your cave not by chance, but revelation. You are my redemption, Alara, not as Omega to Alpha, but soul to soul. If the pack rejects us, let them. I choose you." The hall erupted, growls of dissent clashing with cries of awe, the air electric with the scent of fur and fury. The elder lunged, dagger flashing in the torchlight, a final bid for the old order. Ilara's gift flared, silver paths illuminating the assailant's footing, a slick patch of spilled blood, treacherous under the weight of zeal. She shoved Kyle aside instinctively, her cry lost in the chaos as the elder slipped, blades skittering across stone. Kale surged, pinning the foe with ethical restraint, not killing, but restraining, his roar a command that quelled the fray. "Enough! The Dusa has spoken through her chosen. We rebuild not with blood, but with the light of the Forsaken." The seer nodded, invoking the rite's culmination. Lunar light poured through the slits, bathing them in ethereal silver, the necklace resonating in harmony. The council knelt, one by one, the Weavos shifting to a unified chorus. Hope's howl piercing the night. Thorn's shadows dissolved in the face of prophecy fulfilled. Southern threats would yield to Ilara's paths, uniting clans in a renaissance born of compassion. Yet the choice's cost lingered. Kyle relinquished the solitary crown, sharing rule with her as equal, a union that healed his guilt through her forgiveness, her rebirth through his atonement. In the quiet that followed, as dawn's first blush gilded the spires, Kale drew Ilara close, their foreheads touching, breaths mingling in the fire's dying warmth. The bond sealed, visceral and profound, a love not immediate reward, but redemptive proof, where suffering yielded to shared strength. Her pale blood warmed in his embrace, the necklace cooling to a gentle glow, symbol of protections realized. Outside, snow fell softly, erasing old tracks, while the wind carried whispers of new beginnings under the moon's benevolent watch. Rebirth claimed them, not without scars, but with the ethical fire of choices that crowned mercy eternal. If your heart beat alongside ours, like, comment, and subscribe, because every soul that joins our moon keeps the flame of redemption alive.